In episode 3, the big story in Madre Linda is the disappearance of Natalie. Love is pretty stressed out about it, but Joe isn't. He's been here before. They did have to speak to authorities, but they played it off like they barely knew Natalie. They did admit, though, that she was the realtor that ended up showing Love the bakery. Love does, however, think that they might have gotten a gift. Matthew is being very suspicious. He's not talking to media, and quite frankly, he looks guilty. Joe's advice is, for the meantime, act normal, and that's what Love does. She heads to the fresh tart and opens it up. But as she's waiting for customers, Sherry and her little gang come as, quote, concerned citizens. She wants to know if Love has any information since Love lives right next door, and it becomes evident that Sherry is convinced that Matthew had something to do with this. Love kind of tells Sherry the same thing she told the authorities. Nothing was out of the ordinary, but she does tell her that Natalie had showed Love the bakery right before she went missing. And Sherry says, "Oh my God, that must be so difficult for you." And Love plays right into it, thanking Sherry for her concern and saying that the only thing that's getting her through this is coming to the bakery, baking, and then pulls out vanilla bean keto scones. And to Love's surprise, Sherry and her crew actually end up buying some. Joe is spending his time volunteering at the library since Marion, the librarian, didn't actually hire him. Marion introduces Joe to another librarian named Dante, who's a blind former member of the Navy, and the trio start talking about the missing white woman syndrome. It's the syndrome where the media only seems to pay attention when bad things happen to beautiful white women, ignoring other minorities, which is a big thing for Marion, who's black, and Dante, who's blind. Joe, however, fails this test miserably. Dante does mention that one of Natalie's friends is about to speak to the press, so Joe ends up excusing himself, going to the corner of the library and watching it on his phone. And to his surprise, that close friend is Sherry, which Joe knows is bullshit because Sherry couldn't stand Natalie. But Sherry puts on that facade, demanding that Matthew come out and say something. But on live television, Sherry does say that Love was one of the last people with her. And Joe can't believe that Sherry just said that. As soon as the newscast goes off the air, Joe gets a phone call from the detectives. Although it doesn't actually have to do with anything from the news. It has to do with surveillance camera picking up Joe and Natalie in a parking lot of a grocery store. And it looks pretty bad because it's the visual of Natalie giving Joe condoms. Joe's trying to figure out a way out of this, and he decides, I'm just going to be honest. So he tells the detectives that because of having a new child and a mother-in-law pops in whenever, it's tough to really get some privacy. He makes them very uncomfortable by telling them that he was in that parking lot jerking off and Natalie has a sick sense of humor. That's it. The detectives seem to buy this, just asking him, could you please not do that anymore? And Joe seems to be, at least in the meantime, in the clear. While Joe's being interrogated, though, Love was trying to get a hold of him, and she's a little stressed out about the fact that he's not answering his phone. She gets a wanted distraction when Theo walks in. He tells Love that he was able to hop the fence and avoid the media, but because he left his house in a hurry, he forgot his wallet, and he's there, hat in hand, just looking for some free food. He is flirting pretty hard with Love, and she does ask him not to do that. He agrees, reiterating, I'm just here asking for food. So she gives him a cupcake, and when he accepts the carrot cake one, she starts reminiscing about making carrot cake for 40. She, however, gets a phone call from Dottie, who tells her that Henry's in the hospital. So she frantically has to leave the bakery, and Theo actually offers to watch it while she's gone. Love ends up meeting Joe at the hospital, and it turns out Henry has the measles. They figure he must have gotten it from someone who was unvaccinated in the area. And for the first time in a long time, Joe Goldberg is legitimately scared. Love is now tasked with letting the neighborhood know that Henry has measles, just in case somebody isn't vaccinated. She starts calling around, but word ends up getting to Sherry. Sherry tells Love, there's no reason to be embarrassed. And Love isn't embarrassed, she's just concerned. Sherry offers to let the neighborhood know, but Love says, no, I think it's important I do this myself. When she gets off the phone with Sherry, she sees Dottie on the phone. And Love wants to know why Dottie was on the phone. And Dottie lets her know that she just bought a vineyard. All that Quinn family money that was in flux, now it's invested in a vineyard. It was a once-in-a-lifetime opportunity Dottie couldn't pass up. Love yells at her mom, I'm sitting here wondering why I want to be friends with Sherry when she keeps stabbing me in the back. And then I remembered, it reminds me of my relationship with you. She then kicks Dottie out of the hospital, but she's got a bigger issue. The Sherry interview did spark some interest from the police. The media is camped out outside of a fresh tart, and Love is freaking out a little bit. She thinks that laying low and acting normal isn't really working. But Joe luckily has a backup plan. There was one thing that Joe kept from Natalie's box, and it was the bloody rag. So he tells Love, I'm just going to go home, grab it, and plant it in Matthew's yard. But when he goes home and he grabs the rag, all of a sudden he realizes he's feeling really, really crappy. And that's when it dawns on him he has the measles. He must have gotten it from Henry because when he was a child in the orphanage, he told the doctor there that he was vaccinated, but he actually wasn't. Joe starts hallucinating and he realizes I have to plant this pretty quickly before something goes wrong. So he hops Matthew's fence, but he ends up passing out in his yard. Matthew grabs him, brings him inside, and when Joe wakes up, the first question Matthew has is, "What were you doing in my yard?" And Joe says, "I must have had a fever dream." Joe then apologizes for everything that Matthew's going through with Natalie, and Matthew says, Natalie said that you and her were getting pretty close. Did she mention going to her sister's or anything? And Joe says, no. Joe then checks his cell phone, and there's no update on Henry, which is cause for concern. The two start talking about fatherhood, and Matthew tells him that he had really no interest in being a father, but then he met Theo's mom, and he actually got excited about it, although he was a pretty shitty stepfather. But Theo's mom remarried, got a new family, and now he actually hates her even more, so Theo comes around by default. Matthew admits to Joe, most of the time, I have no idea what I'm doing. All I know is that he needs me, just like your son needs you. Matthew then asks Joe one more time, do you sure that Natalie didn't say anything about taking a trip? I mean, I'm sure she's fine. She's just doing this for attention, and it's spiraled out of control, and now she's embarrassed to come back. Joe can't answer the question, though, because he gets a text saying that Henry's fever is broke, and Joe is immediately relieved. Joe does end up giving Matthew some advice before he leaves. He tells him, you got to talk to the press, man. The optics are terrible. You need to tell your story before they do. All of Matthew's compassion, bringing him in, giving him Tylenol so the fever went down, giving him some fatherly advice, has made Joe completely reconsider framing him. On the way back to Joe's place, he ends up grabbing the bloody rag and bringing it inside. A couple hours later, Love comes back with Henry, and Love had no idea that Joe was actually feeling pretty crappy. After finding out how Joe's doing, she asks if he ended up framing Matthew, and Joe tells her, I couldn't bring myself to do it. And Love actually thinks that was the right call, saying, I mean, what kind of people would we even been? They then decide that night to burn Natalie's bloody rag. The next night, the neighborhood decides to have a vigil outside of Matthew's place for Natalie. In reality, it's just an opportunity for Sherry and her friends to do an Instagram photo shoot where they act like they're mourning. Joe and Love do show up, as does the local media. One person that is absent, though, is Matthew. He's yet to make a statement, and it looks like he's not going to. But as everybody's about to pack up and leave, Matthew does come out. He thanks everybody for showing up, saying that it would mean a lot to Natalie. But then he looks right in the camera and says, Natalie, if you're out there, come home. Or at the very least, just let me know that you're okay. But then he also turns into Liam Neeson from Taken, saying that if somebody had hurt her, he's a very particular set of skills. He will find them. He will kill them. This doesn't intimidate Joe at all, though. He's actually in pretty good spirits. He looks over at the detectives who have also arrived, and he figures they don't have anything. And if they do, we'll figure it out. The next day at the bakery, Love is at the counter when Gil walks in. Love asks Gil where his wife is, and he says, yeah, that's actually why I stopped by. She's up with the girls at her mom's place recovering. They had it. Well, it turns out Gil's an anti-vaxxer, and he starts trying to plead his case to Love about why he's an anti-vaxxer while also apologizing for what Henry went through. Love, however, doesn't say much. She just wraps up his baked goods and gives it to him. But right before he leaves the shop, she calls his name, and when he turns around, she whacks him in the head with a rolling pin. Thank you so much for checking out this recap. Please consider subscribing to the channel. Hit thumbs up if you liked it. Smash that thumbs down button if you thought this sucked. Make sure to be nice in the comment section. If you don't see the next video up in the end screen there, I'll get it up in a few days, not to worry. And I have merchandise, so go buy a mug or something. It's never too early to think about Christmas gifts, folks. But once again, thank you for checking out this recap.